To my friends on the left, I ask you to reconcile your belief in freedom and dignity for all people with those images of children writhing in pain and going still on a cold hospital floor. For sometimes resolutions and statements of condemnation are simply not enough. Indeed, I'd ask every member of Congress and those of you watching at home tonight to view those videos of the attack and then ask, what kind of world will we live in if the United States of America sees a dictator brazenly violate international law with poison gas and we choose to look the other way? Franklin Roosevelt once said, "Our national determination to keep free of foreign wars and foreign entanglements cannot prevent us from feeling deep concern when ideals and principles that we have cherished are challenged." Our ideals and principles, as well as our national security, are at stake in Syria, along with our leadership of a world where we seek to ensure that the worst weapons will never be used. America's not the world's policeman. Terrible things happen across the globe, and it is beyond our means to right every wrong. But when, with modest effort and risk, we can stop children from being gassed to death and thereby make our own children safer over the long run, I believe we should act. That's what makes America different. That's what makes us exceptional. With humility, but with resolve, let us never lose sight of that essential truth. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Almost exactly 15 minutes, the President of the United States doing his best to try to convince a very skeptical American public that what's happening in Syria right now is, in fact, in the national security interests of the United States. We have complete analysis of what's going on. Jake Tapper is with us. Jake is the chief Washington correspondent of CNN, the anchor of the lead. All right, Jake, did the president make the case to a lot of Americans who don't see this as a major national security threat to the United States that the U.S. has to maintain that credible threat of military force in Syria?
Well, I mean, one of the things that was so interesting about what he did this evening was he specifically addressed doubts, specific doubts, 6 or 7 questions about why should we get involved. I've never heard a president talking about the need to show force, going through all the different arguments ticking down. So I don't know if he successfully made his case to the American people. According to polls, the American people are convinced that Assad did this and that it was wrong, but they still don't want to get involved. But he addressed specifically what if this is a slippery slope? What if the enemies of what if the Assad regime retaliates? Why aren't others stepping into the fray? Why does it have to be us? Why aren't we seeking other solutions? He went bit by bit trying to go. This was a speech specifically to a public that doesn't want to go to war. And in fact, it sounded like a president who doesn't want to go to war.
Yeah, he certainly doesn't want to go to war, but he wants that threat to hover over these discussions that are taking place right now. Newt Gingrich is here, Stephanie Cutter is here, John King, Gloria Borger. Newt Gingrich, you got to admit that if there is an opportunity for some sort of peaceful solution to destroy Syria's chemical weapons stockpiles, it was in part, if not largely, the result of this threat of U.S. military force.
I think that helped, although I think Kerry's description of an unbelievably small attack probably didn't, threaten the Russians.
You heard the president say the United States military does not do pinpricks.
Well, you can go back and look at dropping 2 bombs in the Balkans. The American military does what the politicians tell it to. And if politicians say pinprick, they do pinprick. That's the duty of the military to do what politicians
But you just heard the commander-in-chief say there would not be pinpricks.
Well, which is different than the Secretary of State. Let me just make 3 quick points. This speech was a mistake. If you're going to ask the Congress to wait, you don't burn up an evening speech. You have a press conference in the afternoon. You say, I have decided to follow up on this, and if I need to, I will report to the country if, in fact, the initiative fails. It's very hard to do 2 speeches in 2 or 3 weeks, and he just burned up and now has weeks for people to take it apart. So giving the speech tonight, I think, was a mistake. You'd been much better off to done. Second,
right, hold on that second thought. Let's Stephanie Cutter go ahead and react to that. Was the speech tonight a mistake?
Absolutely not. And there's no reason why he can't give two speeches. I think that the country was calling for a speech like that. He made a very persuasive case, the clearest case yet, of why this is in the United States' security interest and why we must act. And in terms of a pinprick versus a small attack, to address Newt's criticism, I think that the president's right. The military doesn't do pinpricks. And the whole purpose of describing what this mission is to assure the American people that this is not going to be a slippery slope into war. No boots on the ground, no open-ended war. This is a targeted strike to deter and degrade a dictator who poisoned his own people.
Let me just say, the challenge of being a historian in the city is Mayaguez was a pinprick. I can go through 20 pinpricks. So let me put that to one side. Two big things in the speech I found very confusing. One is Franklin Delano Roosevelt went to war when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Despite every effort of the best politician in the 20th century, he could not convince the American people. The polling numbers are overwhelming. FDR would not have given this speech. FDR would have been very cautious because he didn't oppose 85% of the American people. Second, as a Republican, I just want to say this bluntly, as a Republican, I am sick of this president and his allies misstating history. The Congress voted to go into Afghanistan. The Congress voted to go into Iraq. John Kerry voted to go into Iraq. And Hillary Clinton voted to go into Iraq. So let's not pretend there was no legislative branch involvement in the last decade.
The thing that struck me tonight about the president's speech was, as Jake said, he went through all the cons, okay? And the big pro, of course, national security. But he made the moral argument about why America is exceptional. We are different from everybody else. Mm-hmm. We have the burden of leadership in this country when it comes to people gassing their children. And he said thereby saving our own children in the process. But I think the moral argument is something nobody would sort of quarrel with him about. We all understand that. The question that I have is, did he explain the back and forth in his own mind about this? Because if we do have this moral need to defend the world, then why didn't he just do it? Right? I mean, why didn't he use the words?
I think he answered that, Gloria. He made it clear that we're stronger as a country when we act together, and going to Congress was a way to do that. That sent a signal to the world, particularly if we weren't getting a UN Security Council resolution, that we were acting as a country.
It's fascinating, Wolf. You know this from our days covering the White House. To the Speaker's point, I don't know if he burned a speech or not, whether it was right or wrong, but their decision for a president to give a speech to the American people talking about potential military conflict, when that happens, military action is plan A. It is front and center. This president was saying it's plan B, that B, stand by. We might have to do this. We're going to give diplomacy a chance. That is rare. Hasn't happened in my lifetime for a president to say, I'm trying to prepare you for plan B. Listen to me. We might get to this at some point. In part, to Stephanie's point, could he have given a press conference? Maybe. But when they have talked about this in a press conference format, the president often acknowledges the arguments of the other side, and the opposition has grown when the president and Secretary Kerry have talked about it in other public settings.
Hold your thoughts for a moment. I just want to alert our viewers. CNN has been doing some instant polling with people who are actually watching the president's speech. We're going to have the results of what the American public, actual people who actually watch, what they think. But I want to bring in now a key member of the United States House of Representatives. Elijah Cummings is one of those undecided Democrats. The president, Congressman, was speaking at you. You have not yet made up your mind. Correct me if I'm wrong.
He's not only speaking to me.
He was speaking in part to you. Did he convince you that he's right?
I thought he did a very good job, and I still haven't decided. But I got to tell you, it was not a wasted speech. As a matter of fact, I told the president he needed to make this speech. I thought he made a great moral argument. This whole idea that our troops could be gassed, that is very significant. I mean, you don't hear that too often. That's real. I mean, in other words, it would be unfair warfare. But, what I wanted the president to do, and I think he did it, was to tell us why this is in the national security interests of the country. I thought he did a good job. And I like the fact that he acknowledged Iraq. I told the president, when he came to the Congress, he did not only come to us, he came to our constituents. When you've got 90% of your constituents saying no.
In your district?
In my district, and this is a district which is 77% for the president, by the way, voted for the president. You've got to address my constituents, too. And other members of Congress are in the same place. And the other thing that he did was, there's a question of what are the objectives. One was to degrade the capacity of Assad to use weapons. I don't think he dealt with the second piece. If he does not completely degrade his capacity, then what truly is deterrence? And I think he kind of hit on it, but I would have liked for him to expand a little bit more.
What else does he need to do to convince you, a great supporter of his,
got to show me
that you will vote in favor of this authorization?
He's got to make it clear to me, and I thought he did a pretty good job here tonight, that this is not going to mushroom into something else. My constituents are tired of war. I mean, they are painfully tired. They saw what happened to Iraq. We went to Iraq on some untruths. This is what they tell me. Not only did we go on some untruths, but then we spent $1 trillion. We lost men and women. The first person to be killed in Iraq was from my district. And so they want to know that it's not Iraq.
Did you vote to authorize the war in Iraq?
No.
You voted against it.
That's right.
And so your inclination is to vote against any military authorization?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. The one thing that we were elated about today was this Russian proposal. And I understand what the president is doing. The president is saying, okay, and we need to give the president credit. They wouldn't be talking. These Russians wouldn't be talking if it were not for the president who made a decision. Keep in mind, he made a decision to go in. And then he said, I want to bring the country with me. So that decision had a great bearing on the Russians and the Syrians. But I've got to get past, Wolf, the idea that it might mushroom into something else. That's the uncertainty.
In other words, there would be unintended consequences.
That's right.
And there could be an escalation of this war. And once again, U.S. troops would be on the ground.
11 years, $1 trillion, people killed. That's what our folks are worried about. And I think that's the worry, whether it's a Republican district or a Democratic district. To be frank with you, in my district, I've only talked to maybe 3 or 4 people out of probably 2,000 or 3,000 who said that they're for this.
But you think folks who watch the president
I think folks who watch
would be impressed?
I think he probably swayed some people. But, when you've got the backdrop of Iraq, when you've got a Colin Powell, who people trust, one of the most trusted men in the world, to come with inaccurate information. And a lot of my constituents say, well, we trust the president, we love the president, but you're sure the information is accurate. But one of the things that is interesting about this, it seems that the public now, from all the polling, is convinced that Assad did use chemical weapons. I think the president painted a great picture of what happened. It's a horrific picture, but a great picture, very graphic, and I thought he did a good job of that.
Elijah Cummings, I know you're going to be weighing heavily
Big time.
in your mind what he said. I sense there's a little bit of a shift, but you're not there with him yet.
No.
Elijah Cummings, Democrat of Maryland, thanks very much for joining us. Newt Gingrich, what do you think? We got a congressman who's undecided, a liberal Democrat, who loves the president of the United States, but he's not yet ready to commit.
I thought Congressman Cummings laid it out perfectly. I think you could take that interview and show it around the country, and it captures exactly where the American people are. I think in every district, whether they're for or against the president in the election, people have come to the conclusion that said that Assad's really bad. 80% of the country believes Assad did use poison gas. They think it's a terrible thing, and yet, and I think part of it's something that Stephanie and I have talked about a lot, which is this country is tired. Mm-hmm. We have been through over a decade of war, and it's very hard to convince people that we're somehow going to magically...
And Stephanie, and you've worked with the president for a long time. If he hasn't yet been able to convince Elijah Cummings that he's right, he's got an enormous challenge ahead of him.
Well, I think the congressman reflects where the country is, really. And as Newt said, this is a country that is very war-weary. We've been at war a long time. And the president is the person who's actually bringing those wars to an end. But it's right for the American people to approach this with some skepticism. The president has been, and tonight he gave a great speech to lay out why the U.S. must act, why it's in our security interest, and what the consequences are if we don't.
Also be skeptical about the United Nations. This is and the president did not spend a lot of time in this speech talking about the unintended consequences of going to the UN, for example, which would be the Russians saying you have to eliminate the threat of the use of force. Kerry now going on his negotiating trip.
Apparently got blown up today.
Right, and that got blown up today. But in factoring in how people feel about it, they're saying, Okay, now we're going to take this to the United Nations, and I bet if you polled Americans on the UN, they wouldn't feel so great about that.
Iraq was supposed to be quick and limited. Americans don't see any good have come of it, and as the congressman said, we paid a high price. Egypt, everyone was so euphoric when you had a new government, those young people in the streets. Look what happened. Libya looked good for a while, then Benghazi. They look at the Middle East, and they say, can we really do any good?
All right, guys, don't forget, we have an instant poll that we're going to be reporting on what the American public who actually watched the speech, what they think our continuing coverage goes on right now. Piers Morgan picking it up. Piers?